The murder of Martha Moxley. The night before Halloween in Belle Haven, a wealthy teenage girl was murdered in the night. The case went unsolved for 25 years, until a suspect was arrested, who had ties to the Kennedy family. Greenwich in Connecticut is one of the richest places in the United States, with an average annual salary of $350,000, and property owned by people associated with large hedge funds that the area is known for. The neighborhood of Belle Haven is now an exclusive gated community within Greenwich that in the 70s used to be a summer resort for wealthy travelers from New York City. A day before Halloween, on October 30, 1975, 15-year-old high school student Martha Elizabeth Moxley was murdered in Belle Haven, which shocked the entire region. Her murder went unsolved for 25 years until a Kennedy family member was linked to the death. Born in August 1960 in San Francisco, California. The Moxley family moved to Greenwich soon after Martha's birth, and she was raised in a rich society with even richer friends but had none of the snobbery that some of her neighbors were known for. On that fateful evening in 1975, Martha and her friends went out to take part in Mischief Night, an informal holiday a day before Halloween in which people take part in pranks, parties, or in some locations, vandalism. Also known as Devil's Night. The tradition began in England in the late 18th century and historically took place a day before Bonfire Night on the 4th of November. As it went international, the date moved away from Bonfire Night and ended up a day before Halloween. In the 1970s, pranks were more about harmless fun, which included ringing doorbells and running away, throwing toilet paper into trees, and rearranging garden furniture. For a 15-year-old girl, it was the most fun to be had in a wealthy neighborhood, until death came knocking. Martha's neighbors, in the house opposite, were the Skakel family, who had familial links to the Kennedy administration. Ethel Skakel was married to U.S. Senator Robert F. Kennedy and was the sister-in-law of President John F. Kennedy. Ethel's nephew, Michael Skakel, who was 15 at the time, would eventually be convicted of Martha's murder, which sent shockwaves through the political sphere. Prior to the murder, Martha had been seen by friends flirting with 17-year-old Thomas Skakel, Michael's brother. They were last seen at 9:30 p.m. kissing behind the fence of the Skakel residence, beside their large swimming pool. Her friends left them to it and went back to their own homes. When Martha didn't return home that night or the next morning, her family became concerned. At 12 p.m. on Halloween, one of her family members found her body beneath a tree in their backyard. She was nude from the waist down and had been beaten to death with a 6-iron golf club, pieces of which were found beside her body. An autopsy concluded she had not been sexually assaulted but had died from a combination of being beaten with the golf club and stabbed with a sharp section of it as it broke over her skull. Within a few hours, police traced the golf club to the Skakel residence, and were told to tread carefully due to the family's connection to the Kennedys. Martha's friends confirmed they had last seen her with Thomas the night before, which made him the prime suspect. But Thomas's father refused to give police access to his private school or his medical records. Thomas later passed a lie detector test which ruled him out as a suspect. The family attempted to push blame onto a new live-in tutor named Kenneth Littleton, who had started work for the family the night of the murder, but police could find no evidence linking him in any way. Despite knowing that Martha was with Thomas the night of the murder, and despite tracing the murder weapon to the Skakel household, no one was arrested or charged with the murder, and the case was left to ferment in the graveyard of the unsolved. Martha's friends and family were convinced that one of the Skakels had murdered her, and living opposite them became a headache for all concerned. 3 years later, after a drink-driving incident, Michael was sent to a private school in Maine that specialized in teaching young people with mental health and drug problems. While there, it is claimed he admitted to killing Martha many times, but the release of that information was either covered up or ignored as fanciful tales. As the years passed, many books and articles were written about the murder, but still no one had been arrested, and Michael was convinced he was getting away with it. Then in the summer of 1998, 23 years after the murder, and after a book by Mark Furman pointed the finger at Michael. A one-man grand jury was convened to review the evidence. The new investigation vowed to uncover the truth of the murder in Belle Haven. In his original statement when he was 15, Michael claimed that he had gone to a cousin's house to watch a film and returned home about 11:30 p.m. Various private investigations in the years after the murder all seemed to point to Michael as the killer, with only some convinced that Thomas was the culprit. Both brothers changed their alibis and stories over the years, hoping no one would notice, but many detectives believed Michael was the killer. During the grand jury investigation, Kenneth Littleton gave evidence in exchange for immunity and claimed that Michael had lied about his whereabouts that night. Another pupil at the school Michael went to claimed that Michael said he would get away with murder because he was a Kennedy. 18 months later, in January 2000, 25 years after the murder, Michael surrendered to authorities when he heard a warrant was out for his arrest. 3 months later, he was charged with the murder. A year later, in May 2002, the very public trial began, and lasted 3 months when in August 2002, Michael was found guilty of murder and sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. He maintained his innocence and continued to claim he had been at a cousin's house that night. Despite the conviction, campaigns to release him increased, leading to a continuation of the story. There was no forensic evidence to prove that Michael had killed Martha, and he was convicted on the basis of circumstantial evidence and witness statements. In 2003, Robert F. Kennedy wrote an article damning the trial and claimed there was no more evidence against Michael than there was against many others that night. Kennedy also believed that Michael had been framed for the murder as an attack on the Skakel/Kennedy families, but offered no other reason as to why they were targeted beyond their political links. In 2007, Michael's lawyers made an appeal for a retrial based on new evidence. Video logs from a private investigation in 2003 showed that Jatano Bryant, cousin of basketball player Kobe Bryant, admitted that one of his friends wanted to rape Martha. The appeal was thrown out. In 2013, after 11 years in prison, Michael was granted a new trial based on the fact that his lawyer at the time was more interested in collecting money and fame than keeping him out of jail. In November 2013, Michael was released on a $1.2 million bail bond with various restrictions in place. In 2016, the murder conviction was reinstated on a majority decision based on what the court called overwhelming evidence. In 2018, the circus continued. When prosecutors requested to the Supreme Court that Michael be returned to prison to continue his sentence, but another appeal at the same time managed to convince the court that the original trial was unfair. In October 2020, it was made public that Michael would not be retried. And he walked out of court as a free man, 21 years after his conviction, and 45 years after Martha's murder. Martha's family still believe that Michael killed her, and despite being released as a free man, they believe that justice was done, due to the amount of time Michael spent behind bars. But the biggest question that has never been answered throughout the entire affair was simply, what was the motive? In 2021, a documentary finally dug deeper to reveal the missing link. Martha's friends and diary revealed that Michael had an explosive temper and was known to be competitive with Thomas in their professional and private lives. Especially when it came to girls. A leaked document was released in 1995 from a private investigation ordered by Thomas and Michael's father to prove his family innocent, which it didn't. The report proves that Michael lied about his whereabouts. After returning from his cousin's house, he felt horny and climbed a tree outside Martha's window, where he proceeded to masturbate. He then claims that he blacked out and woke up in his own bedroom unaware of what had happened. It was the same tree where Martha's body was found. The motive was most likely rejection when Martha turned down his sexual advances. He was jealous of his brother for getting close with her and wanted her all to himself. The most damning piece of evidence was an audio clip. In it, Michael is heard speaking to a researcher of a new book when he mentions being awoken by Martha's family members to find out where Martha was. He said to the researcher that only one thought crossed his mind: "Oh my God, did they see me last night?" And yet, even to this day, the case is pulled around, twisted, screwed up, and thrown out to various theorists and those convinced either way whether Michael was guilty or not. But at the heart of this story is the brutal murder of a 15-year-old girl, who had her whole life ahead of her. A victim whose story is mostly sidelined in favor of the monster who took her from the world, whether it was Michael or someone who has never been named and remains hidden in the shadows of Belle Haven. Thanks for watching. Please share and subscribe on my YouTube channel and follow me on Facebook @MonpyStories for more.